April 15, 1952. Boeing Airfield, Seattle, Washington. Colonel Guy Townsend stared skeptically at the monstrous silver silhouette dominating the runway. The YB-52 prototype seemed to defy the laws of physics. 185 feet in wingspan, 8 engines hanging from wings so flexible that the tips curled 32 feet upward during flight. "It looks like a flying cathedral," he muttered to his co-pilot. "If that thing takes off, I'll eat my service cap." What Colonel Townsend couldn't imagine, what no one on that spring day could have foreseen, was that he was looking at the longest-lived bomber in the history of military aviation, an aircraft that would fly in 3 different centuries, drop bombs in wars that hadn't even begun, and still be operational 70 years later when all other bombers of its era were rusting dust in airplane graveyards. Soviet engineers, observing intelligence photographs of the new American bomber, sent their assessment to the Kremlin. "The Americans have built a dinosaur. Too big, too slow, too vulnerable. Our MiGs will destroy it in minutes." They were right about everything, except the one thing that mattered. The B-52 Stratofortress would not only outlive its creators, it would outlive its critics, its planned replacements, and the very Cold War for which it was designed. This is the story of how an emergency design created in a weekend became the most enduring weapon in the American arsenal, of how flexibility triumphed over perfection, of how a bomber considered obsolete before its first flight remains indispensable in the 21st century. The Panic of 1948. Birth in a hotel room. In October 1948, the United States Air Force faced an existential crisis. The American nuclear monopoly was ending. The Soviet Union would detonate its first atomic bomb in less than a year. The intercontinental bomber under development, the Convair B-36, was grotesquely slow, 230 miles per hour top speed. Soviet jet fighters would make it an easy target. Boeing had been working on the Model 462, a turboprop-powered bomber. The design was conservative, safe, and completely unsuitable. General Curtis LeMay, commander of the Strategic Air Command, rejected it outright. "I want a jet bomber that can get to Moscow and back. If they can't build it, I'll find someone who can." George Scherer, Boeing's chief engineer, received the news on Friday, October 21st, at the Van Cleve Hotel in Dayton, Ohio. The Pentagon would give Boeing one last chance: submit a new design by Monday morning or lose the most important post-war contract. What happened that weekend became legendary in aeronautical engineering. The Boeing team, 8 engineers, 2 technical draftsmen, and a wood modeler, turned the hotel suite into a makeshift design studio. They worked sleeplessly for 72 hours, consuming coffee and cigarettes, covering the walls with aerodynamic calculations. Von Blumenthal, one of the engineers present, recalled decades later, "We had no computers, no wind tunnel, barely enough slide rules. We designed the world's most advanced bomber with pencils, paper, and sheer desperation." The design that emerged from that weekend was radically different from anything that had come before. 8 Pratt & Whitney J-57 turbojet engines mounted in 4 pods under 35-degree swept wings, bicycle-style landing gear with wingtip stabilizers, a capacity of 70,000 pounds of ordnance, more than any existing bomber, and an operational range of 8,000 miles without refueling. Ed Wells, Boeing's vice president of engineering, personally carved a scale model from balsa wood, while his colleagues refined the calculations. On Monday morning, the exhausted team presented the Pentagon with a 14-inch wooden model and a 33-page handwritten technical report. General K.B. Wolfe, head of weapons development, examined the model in silence for 5 minutes that seemed endless. Finally, he spoke. "Gentlemen, you have just saved your company and possibly the future of American defense. You have the green light." What no one in that room understood was that the emergency design born of desperation contained an accidental feature that would ensure its longevity: extreme structural flexibility. The Flying Cathedral, Engineering the Impossible. On April 15, 1952, when the YB-52 finally taxied down the runway at Boeing Field, spectators gasped. It was grotesquely enormous. The 160-foot-long fuselage seemed endless. The wings stretched out like the arms of a Gothic cathedral, so thin and flexible that they visibly buckled under their own weight. Tex Johnston, the legendary Boeing test pilot who would conduct the first flight, paced around the prototype with growing concern. "The wings move like jelly," he remarked to his co-pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Guy Townsend. "If this thing flies, it will be a miracle. If it flies well, it will be black magic." The wing design was equal parts revolutionary and terrifying. To achieve efficiency at cruising altitude, 40,000 feet, while carrying 450,000 pounds of gross weight, Boeing had created an extraordinarily thin wing with a thickness-to-chord ratio of just 10%. Conventional wings were twice as thick. The result was a wing that flexed 32 feet between the ground and flight. In severe turbulence, the wingtips could move 50 feet vertically. The engineers had intentionally designed this extreme flexibility. A rigid wing would have snapped under the forces involved. But convincing the pilots that this apparent catastrophe was actually genius took courage. The first flight nearly ended in disaster. During takeoff taxi, one of the wingtip stabilizers jammed in the retracted position. The B-52 began to list dangerously to one side. Johnston, with reflexes born from years of flying unstable prototypes, compensated with ailerons and rudder, keeping the wings level through pure muscle instinct. At 160 miles per hour, the 185-foot wingspan monster lifted off the runway, its wings flexing upward into a near V shape. Johnston kept it in level flight for 2.5 hours, demonstrating flight characteristics that defied expectations. "It flies like a fighter," he reported incredulously. "A very, very big, very, very heavy fighter." The 8 Pratt & Whitney J57 engines produced 10,000 pounds of thrust each, 80,000 pounds of gross power. This was twice the thrust of any existing bomber, but what was truly revolutionary was its efficiency. At 40,000 feet, cruising at 460 miles per hour, the B-52 consumed less fuel per mile than the piston-powered bombers it replaced. The fuel system was a masterpiece of complex engineering. 48 tanks distributed throughout the airframe held up to 47,975 gallons of JP4. Pumps and valves automatically transferred fuel to maintain the center of gravity during flight, compensating for fuel consumption and changes in weapons load. The system was so complex that it required its own dedicated control panel. Major Jack Simmons, flight engineer on the initial tests, described his first encounter with the fuel panel. It looked like a refinery control panel. Hundreds of gauges, valves, switches. It took me 3 months to learn how to operate it under normal conditions. Then, it took me 3 more years to learn how to operate it during emergencies. The 6-man crew operated in 2 separate cockpits. The pilot, co-pilot, and navigator bombardier occupied the upper cockpit with panoramic views. Below, in a claustrophobic, windowless space, the radar navigator, electronic warfare operator, and tail gunner worked by instrumentation. During round-the-clock missions, they never saw daylight. Defensive armament consisted of 4.50 caliber machine guns in the tail turret, controlled by radar. It was pathetically inadequate against supersonic fighters. But the Strategic Air Command had a different philosophy. The B-52 would fly so high, so fast, and with such sophisticated electronic countermeasures that the fighters would never get close enough to fire. This assumption would be tested in ways no one anticipated. The transformation. From nuclear bomber to conventional weapon. For the first 10 years of service, the B-52 had a single purpose: to deliver thermonuclear weapons to Soviet targets. Each Strategic Air Command aircraft carried enough destructive power to level entire cities. The B-52 was America's nuclear fist, the threat that maintained peace through mutual terror. SAC pilots trained obsessively for a mission they prayed they would never have to fly. 15-minute alerts meant living alongside the aircraft, ready to take off at a moment's notice. During exercises, the B-52s flew constantly, ready to receive the go code that would mean the end of the world. General Curtis LeMay, SAC commander, had made the B-52 the core of his deterrence strategy. If they tell me to fire, I want every Soviet city gone within 24 hours. The B-52 gives me that capability. It's peace through overwhelming force. Statistically, a 2% loss rate was acceptable, but every B-52 shot down represented 6 men. Pilots trained for years, navigators with invaluable experience, tail gunners who knew every defensive trick. These losses were irreplaceable. More significantly, Linebacker 2 proved something crucial. Even in the most hostile environment imaginable, the B-52 could survive and accomplish its mission. The combination of altitude, electronic countermeasures, coordinated tactics, and sheer structural toughness allowed it to absorb punishment that would destroy less robust aircraft. Colonel James McCarthy, who planned many of the Linebacker 2 missions, reflected years later. We learned that the B-52 was not invulnerable, but we also learned that it was remarkably resilient. Aircraft returned with SAM damage that would have taken out smaller fighters or bombers. Structural redundancy, multiple backup systems, and sheer mass gave it a survivability that surprised even its designers. Endless evolution. Endless modernization. The end of the Vietnam War could have meant the retirement of the B-52. The Air Force had planned to replace it with the supersonic B-1 Lancer in the 1980s. But history had other plans. The B-1, designed to penetrate Soviet defenses at low altitude and high speed, proved prohibitively expensive and plagued by technical problems. The stealth B-2 Spirit, introduced in the 1990s, cost $2.1 billion per aircraft, too expensive for mass production. The B-52, meanwhile, continued to fly mission after mission, adapting to roles no one had imagined in 1952. The most radical transformation came in the 1980s with the integration of cruise missiles. The AGM-86B air-launched cruise missile allowed the B-52 to strike from 1,500 miles away, beyond the range of enemy defenses. A single B-52H could carry 20 ALCMs, each with a nuclear or conventional warhead, each capable of autonomous navigation to pre-programmed targets. Brigadier General Richard Schultes, operations commander of the 2nd Bomb Wing, explained the transformation. The B-52 evolved from a penetrator bomber to a strategic delivery platform. It no longer needed to fly over hostile territory. It could launch from safe airspace and let the missiles do the dangerous work. Avionics modernization in the 1990s replaced Eisenhower-era analog instruments with modern digital systems. Multifunction liquid crystal displays replaced mechanical dials. GPS navigation computers replaced sextants and celestial navigation. The B-52H of the 2000s shared only the basic structure with the 1954 B-52A. But the most impressive modernization came in the post-Cold War era, the integration of precision-guided munitions. The Joint Direct Attack Munition, JDAM, a GPS guidance kit attached to conventional bombs, transformed the inaccurate saturation bomber into a surgically precise platform. During Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, B-52s dropped hundreds of JDAMs against specific targets with accuracy within meters. The same aircraft that had leveled square miles in Vietnam could now destroy a specific building without damaging adjacent structures. Colonel Christopher Duff, a B-52 squadron commander during Iraqi Freedom, marveled, "We could put a 2,000-pound JDAM through a specific window from 40,000 feet. The least accurate bomber in history had become one of the most accurate, and we could still drop unguided bombs when we needed to saturate an area. That versatility is irreplaceable. The Ghost Fleet, graveyards, and cannibalization. By 2025, only 76 B-52Hs remain in active service out of the 744 Stratofortresses built between 1952 and 1962. The rest in the Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Center's Boneyard at Davis-Monthan AFB, Arizona, an aircraft graveyard where silver giants corrode in the desert sun. But these retired B-52s aren't truly dead. They're organ banks, supplying critical parts to keep the operational fleet flying. When an engine fails on a serviceable B-52H, technicians travel to Davis-Monthan, locate a compatible engine on a retired aircraft, and ship it for installation. This cannibalization process keeps the survivors alive. Master Sergeant Travis Chen, a maintenance technician with 20 years of B-52 experience, explained the reality. Some of these planes have parts from 10 different aircraft, an engine from tail number 0001, a hydraulic system from 0234, electrical components from who knows where. It's like your grandpa's car that keeps running because you know all the tricks to keep it alive. The stories of individual longevity are astonishing. B-52H, tail number 60-0008, nicknamed Wise Guy, entered service in 1961. By 2023, it had accumulated more than 20,000 flight hours, equivalent to being continuously in the air for 2.3 years. It had flown missions in Vietnam, Operation Desert Storm, Iraqi Freedom, and operations against ISIS. Its most recent pilot, Captain Sarah Mitchell, was 28 years old, 42 years younger than the aircraft she was flying. It's strange to think this plane was flying combat missions when my grandfather was a boy, he reflected. The instrumentation has been updated multiple times. The engines have been replaced. But the basic structure is the same as the day it left the factory in 1961. It's immortal. Immortality comes at a price. Keeping B-52s operational requires obsessive work. Each flight hour requires 53 hours of maintenance. Technicians inspecting wing structures for fatigue cracks, replacing hydraulic components before they fail, updating software on advanced systems while maintaining compatibility with 1960s-era hardware. The re-engineering program, New Engines for Old Wings, the boldest decision in B-52 history, was announced in 2021 to completely replace the 8 Pratt & Whitney TF-33 engines that had powered the B-52H since 1961. The new Rolls-Royce F-130 engine offered 30% better fuel efficiency, greater range, and lower emissions. The cost, $2.6 billion to re-engine 76 aircraft. But compared to developing an entirely new bomber, estimated at more than $100 billion, it was remarkably inexpensive. General Timothy Ray, commander of Global Strike Command, defended the decision. We could design a new bomber from scratch. It would take 20 years and cost a fortune. Or we can upgrade a proven platform that already does everything we need. The B-52 with new engines will fly until 2050, possibly 2060. That's 3 centuries of continuous service. No other military aircraft in history comes close to that longevity. Skeptics pointed out the absurdity, installing state-of-the-art turbofan engines on an airframe designed during the Truman administration. But Boeing engineers and the B-52's operational history argued otherwise. The airframe was sound, the systems upgradable, and the operational versatility unmatched. Installation of the first batch of F-130s began in 2024. Technicians carefully removed the aging TF-33s, engines that had been in continuous service for 63 years, and installed the sleek F-130S. The transformation was dramatic. The new engines were 40% quieter, consumed less fuel, and produced more thrust. Initial flight tests confirmed optimistic projections. With the new engines, the B-52H could fly 25% farther on the same fuel load. More critically, it could maintain cruising speed at higher altitudes, improving survivability against modern defenses. The paradox: obsolete and indispensable. In 2025, the B-52 is simultaneously the most obsolete and most valuable bomber in the U.S. arsenal. Its limitations are obvious. Subsonic in an age of hypersonics, large and detectable in an age of stealth, manned in an age of drones. Any rational military analyst would say it should have been retired decades ago. Yet it continues to fly because no replacement offers its unique combination of characteristics. The B-2 Spirit is invisible to radar, but can carry only 16 JDAMs versus 51 on a B-52. The B-1 Lancer is supersonic, but has shorter range and 3 times the operating costs. Drones lack tactical flexibility and payload capacity. The B-52 offers something no modern aircraft replicates: extreme versatility at reasonable costs. It can deliver precision-guided munitions, traditional unguided bombs, long-range cruise missiles, sea mines, and strategic nuclear weapons. It can operate from forward bases with minimal infrastructure. And it can remain on station for 20 hours, providing extended air support that no fighter can match. During operations against ISIS in 2016 to 2019, B-52s operating from bases in Qatar provided continuous cover over Syria and Iraq. Flying orbits at 40,000 feet, they could respond to air support requests within minutes, launching JDAMs against targets identified by ground forces. Lieutenant General Jeffrey Harijan, commander of Air Forces Central, explained the value. When ground troops need support, they want certainty. The B-52 orbits for hours, loaded with dozens of munitions, ready to respond instantly. That persistence is invaluable. No other system offers that combination of permanence, payload, and precision. Toward the centennial, 2052, and beyond somewhere over the Pacific in 2043, a B-52H will celebrate its centennial while flying an operational mission. Its crews, great-grandchildren of the men who built it, will operate avionics that wouldn't be invented until decades after its manufacture. The original aluminum and titanium structure will remain solid, a testament to engineers who built better than necessary. Air Force planners project B-52 operations until at least 2050, possibly 2060. At that rate, pilots born in 2040 will be flying aircraft built when their great-grandparents were children. The absurdity of this continuity is surpassed only by its effectiveness. Why this extraordinary longevity? The answers are multiple. Original overbuild, Boeing engineers designed massive safety margins. The wings could withstand structural loads 3 times those specified. This redundancy allowed for decades of modifications without compromising structural integrity. Design adaptability. The spacious fuselage and large wings facilitated the integration of new systems. Cruise missiles, laser-guided bombs, modern electronic warfare, everything fit into an airframe designed before these technologies existed. Economy of scale. With 744 built, there is a complete infrastructure for maintenance, spare parts, and expertise. Developing a replacement would require rebuilding this entire infrastructure from scratch. Operational flexibility. The B-52 can do everything reasonably well. It's not the best in any single category, but it's good enough in all of them to remain relevant.